Hello. I don't know if you attended like my mother's funeral or not, but it seemed to me that they kind of rushed through it. You know, what the priest had to say. He knew her pretty well as a parishioner. What the priest had to say, and then Joan was called up to the pulpit and said a few words. I would like to add to that now, seeing as how like I was too shook up to have a turn at the pulpit. That's the reason for me wanting to make this tape. Joan said something to the effect that, you know, for someone who's been all around the world, she's done all right for a girl. She said that was because that was her generation. She took it from a pop song. It was from her generation. I'd like to take a while to speak of my mother's generation. This is what I would have said if I had the chance to have said something. And I didn't say, you know, much at my father's funeral. A neighbor of ours delivered a eulogy of him, and I have to remember that they were of the same generation. You know, first I'd like to say about my mother and father. They both grew up pretty poor. You know, my dad, I feel sorry for him. He was brought up in the heart of Appalachia, like all they had for heating, like the whole house was a pot-belly stove. A lot of times they couldn't afford even the coal or the wood for that. You know, they lived by a train, he told me. You could walk a certain distance, and they would, as the train went across the bridge, it made a turn, and sometimes they would go to the tracks and gather up the coal that was spilled by the train as it made its turn. If they wanted to be warm that night, they'd have to take a bucket and gather up coal by the side of the tracks. You know, they had us all sleep together as 5 boys. Then, at a young age, he had to join the 3 C's. They didn't have anything for him. Like at where he grew up, a lot of people had to send their children to the 3 C's. I want to say these things for the sake of the young people. specifically his great-grandchildren that he never saw, to imagine what it would be like to grow up so hungry and have to be sent off at the age of 13 to someplace, 1,000 miles away in Arizona. The thing about it was, back then, as they always used to say, it only cost a nickel, but you didn't have the nickel. Lots of things that you might have wanted. It only cost a nickel, but you didn't have the nickel to spend. The dad was also, a very little built man, and his father was very abusive of him and his children. All he ever said to him lots of times was just he would come into the house and then just say, "Which corner do you want to land in?" That's all he got out of his dad. Growing up, and then he was really kind of, I just picture him, his youth, just wanting to have things and never having them. Even when he was sent off, they only got paid, maybe a nickel an hour or something like that. But they fed and housed him there. But they even had to take the nickel an hour and send it home to their families. It wasn't for anything he wanted to buy. All he got out of it was a picture postcard one time. I still have that with me. I saved up to buy a picture postcard of cactus in Arizona. I can picture him, maybe crying on the train, having to leave home. There wasn't anything for him there. Then after he spent those years there, they worked hard all day, and just lifting. They built embankments, lifting rocks to build embankments along the side of roads and stuff like that, and they didn't get anything out of it. Then it wasn't long after that he enlisted in the Navy. I picture him going up, when my mother and I visited Chicago, we saw the Great Lakes Naval Training Center where he did his boot camp, and then they had to swim a lot. He learned to swim, and they swim right in the Lake Michigan there. It's no wonder he never did like swimming, because he had to do it, a lot of times. We wouldn't have had any kind of inkling of how it was if we hadn't found this couple of postcards he sent. They were allowed to send a letter home, and there was 2 of them after he died. My grandfather gave it to him. It was underneath us big stacks of letters and pictures from his parishioners. People would give him mail and all. And there on the very bottom, was these postcards that he'd sent home, and he spoke of how cold it was in the ship going over there, and how he spoke only of how when the big guns go off, you know, how you said you never heard anything so loud in your life as the guns, you know, from all the ships who hammer away all day long before you went to the beachhead, and to climb down the side of the big ship and into smaller ships that would actually take him into the island. To think about how frighteningly cold it was. It's like in the winter time, and having to just listen to the guns before you landed was bad enough. And turned out they bombarded the wrong side of the island. There were no Japanese there where they bombed with the guns. They had to walk all the way to the other end of this big island, march for days to reach there. He was a chief pharmacist mate, which meant that they would sift through the bodies that they found. He wasn't in the first wave, he was like in the fourth wave or so. And all the job consisted of is carrying morphine or sulfa drugs. And they decided in an instant just which soldiers were laying there, which one were able to save, and which they weren't able to save. You know, and just they didn't have a lot of time. You know, save a lot. One of the things about it, he didn't talk an awful lot. It was one of those 2 postcards that he had written it down on to tell of those frightening days. He hated the TV show MASH, where they showed a place that was set up with tents and desks and nurses and places to sit and so forth. A camp like that, to him, that wasn't what it was like at all. That wasn't like it was all. It's like people would remain on, like they would march over to one battle area after another. Just, they were, you know, hollered at and ordered. You know, it's like, find them if they think you're going to live, and then the rest you're going to just have to leave there. You know, it's what it amounted to. He hated the show MASH, you know. He got so angry when he saw MASH, especially, you know, that MASH has a laugh track to it. You know, he hated like the idea of someone dressing up like Corporal Klinger or something like that. He hated that. He also said something that'll live with me after his ordeal. We would go different places when we were younger, and he would hear men talking about their military service, and he would say quietly to me, he says, you can always tell the people who saw action who didn't. The people who really saw all the action, you would never, you know, want to speak of it afterwards. They wanted to forget it. They would never talk. You know, whenever he would hear a couple of guys talking about their in the service, he told me that. That still kind of lived with me. You know, I hear from time to time people talking about their war experiences, like my neighbor or something. And it was just like that with Bill. One time we were over in his garage working on his car. I was helping him. And he kind of volunteered. All Bill ever said to me about the whole thing was he told me one time about how they were crossing a creek and he lost his radio. I think I've known Bill all these years, and that's all he ever told me. You know, it's something. It's just like that. It's like my father said. If you've really seen a lot of action, you never want to see. You never really want to speak about it. You never really wanted to hear about it. I just see him, you know, and then he just had to wait, even when the war was over, another year after lots of other of his fellow soldiers got to go home because they had families, and they hold him up in China. All we have of him is a picture of him sitting on a rickshaw. He said told me that there's a building in the background, but he said all the Chinese were either dead or had fled the city. You know, they were at whatever city that they were at. I don't think that he was behind the Great Wall of China. He must have been in what the British call Indochina, somewhere by the coast. But I still think of my dad often, and they should have said something about that. It's on his tombstone. But for a little man, a little small built man, he was a very brave man. I picture him, you know, having to travel across the country again and back to where he was at in Pennsylvania. There was still nothing for anybody to work at, you know, to no work. So he came to, he heard of the jobs in Dayton, Ohio, and worked. He came here and worked his way through college, working at NCR. He did manage to find work right away. My mom said he would wear white shirts to kind of make her think that he was like already working in an office job, but that she could see where they got grimy. He was working on an assembly line, you know, and going to school, and the hardships that he faced here, even when he got back, you know. I think of how many times he must have cried from being like all alone, and nothing for him where he grew up, and stayed in Dayton, and finally did meet my mother. He said they sent him to a place, a tool shop, and he didn't even really want to go in. He got his degree. He didn't really even want to go in there because it looks like such a small 2-bit operation, but it turned out to be the best job he ever had. When they went out of business, and after he's been working there for 10 years or so,